You ever get to the point where the thing that hurt you the most becomes the one thing you can't let go of, not because you want to punish, but because you need the world to see that you weren't wronged into silence? That's where I was when I moved back to Willow Ridge after the divorce, after the funeral, after the last box of pictures went into the attic and everything that mattered fit into an empty pool and a yard I didn't recognize. 3 sentences to start: I lost the life I promised my kids. A neighbor called the cops on me for grieving in my own yard, and that call lit a fuse I didn't know I still had. My name's Eli Mercer, now not the one in the old stories, and I'd come home to fix a piece of the past, a saltwater pool my wife had wanted and I built in quiet, thinking it would stitch us back together. It didn't. The house was small comfort, a shrine to mornings that never came back, and the pool was the loudest silence in the neighborhood. On the other side of the fence lived Marla Benson, pristine hedges, a car that never got a scratch, a mailbox she polished on Sunday like it owed her rent. She kept a notebook. She kept receipts. She kept opinion. The night it started the way it did, I was out in the yard hammering a loose step, nothing dramatic, more ritual than repair, and she stood on her porch, phone out like a judge's gavel. "There's a man out there disturbing the peace," she said to the dispatcher, perfectly calm. By the time the cruiser rolled up, I realized the thing wasn't about the noise or the permit. It was about being watched, cataloged, judged, and I was tired of being the thing under her microscope. The officer handed me a citation: unpermitted structure. The words small and bureaucratic. Everything a knife needs to be legal. Marla smiled like the sun came early that day. That citation was the spark, but the fire was older. Grief makes you petty in a way that's honest. It sharpens the details that used to blur. I could have gotten angry and done something stupid, smashed her mailbox, which would have felt good and stupid. I could have shouted, called names, posted videos online. Instead, I did 2 things. I read the code, and I called on an old friend named Gus, who'd been in construction since before permits were a thing people complained about. Not because I wanted to play the bureaucrat, because I wanted to be right in a way that mattered beyond my own chest. Gus came over with a crooked grin and a clipboard full of memories. "You ever notice how folks with perfect hedges have crooked boundaries?" he said, like a proverb. We measured the fence line. We walked the property with calloused hands and flashlight eyes. There's something about surveying land that slows the rush of anger. Numbers and stakes and corners make emotion the thing you have to translate into facts. The survey found surprise: the shed Marla swore was hers was 6 inches over the setback. The decorative rock wall that made her yard look like a magazine spread sat on a county easement. Her deck extended a hair into our shared line. Not the dramatic kind of violation that ruins a life, but the legal kind that unravels a perfect life if you tug the thread slowly, carefully. When I told Marla, she laughed like it was a joke. She opened her mouth to say, "This is petty," but what came out was thinner. "You wouldn't." That was the line that got my attention, not because she dared me, but because she took for granted that I would fold. That assumption has a smell to it. Once you catch it, you can't unsmell it. I sent a certified letter to the town with the survey attached. I didn't smear her on social media. I didn't shout. I filed a complaint that would put the matter into official hands: inspectors, paperwork, the slow, legal grind that makes consequences feel inevitable without ever needing my hands on a hammer. And that's when things escalated. Not with violence, but with pressure. Inspectors don't show up with drama. They show up with clipboards and formal tone. Notices went on Marla's door. She started answering my texts with 3 little words: "This is harassment." She started to patrol her yard at different hours, watching for me like a hawk who'd lost its mate. Neighbors stopped by with sympathetic smiles. I felt the old guilt at the edges, like family portraits I'd buried. Was I being cruel by exposing a thin facade? But there was a different cruelty here. Marla had made a hobby of policing other people's grief, of turning small private sorrow into public scandal so her own life looked better by comparison. One afternoon, when the inspector stood on her porch with a stack of forms and a voice that never rose above a lecture, Marla confronted me in front of the street. "You think this fixes anything?" she spat, face flushed, that practiced indignation she used like perfume. "You think you can ruin my life and call it justice?" I could have told her grief isn't a weapon, but she didn't want that. She wanted me to feel small. So I told her the truth in the only way that would land. "I don't want to ruin you, Marla. I wanted my yard to stay mine. And for once, for someone to stop treating my pain like a spectacle. She called me everything vengeful, cold, obsessive, the same words she'd write later in the community forum. There was a moment, you know the kind, when things look like they're going to snap. Marla's husband, Tom, came out of the house with more bravado than sense, chest puffed, and barked about neighbors being decent. He stepped too close. Words turned into a shove. That's when a neighbor, old Mrs. Calloway, came by and put her hand on Tom's arm and said, "Back off. This is not how we settle things." It was a ridiculous, small intervention, and it mattered more than any speech would have. In violence, we lose ourselves. In civility, we keep the shape of our long game. I wanted civility to win because my victory had to be something I could sleep with. Weeks turned into months. Marla lost some satellite of her social standing. The HOA sent a letter. The county ordered partial removal of that rock wall. She paid fines that hurt. Not ruinous. She had money. But her composure cracked. I watched her in the grocery aisle once, late, face pale, clutching a jar of pickles like it could anchor her. I felt something odd, then a mix of triumph and pity, like watching someone trip on a rug you didn't lay, and then helping them up because you're still human. People asked me why I didn't go for more, why I didn't make it bigger. The truth is, revenge is a cheap currency. Justice, the slow, tedious, procedural kind, carries weight. It held the story in records and stamps and official signatures. It made Marla accountable not to gossip but to law. My life wasn't restored. Nothing could stitch what was lost back into place. But for once I felt seen, not as a spectacle for someone else's righteousness, but as a person whose grief counted. There was a scene near the end where Marla lost her cool in the HOA meeting. The room smelled of coffee and old newsletters. She stood up, voice high and too practiced, and accused me of making her life impossible. I didn't stand. I watched her, and when she finished, the room looked at her the way you look at a friend whose stories keep changing. That moment, small, civic, felt cinematic to me. Not because it was neat or pretty, but because the truth had finally elbowed into the space her perfect lawn had always occupied. I don't want to act like I'm spotless in this. I filed my complaints knowing exactly what pressure would do. I took a kind of pleasure in watching her scramble. I won't pretend I didn't. But the pleasure was hollow in the quiet hours, the ones that used to be filled with laughter at a table that isn't there anymore. I kept thinking, is this what justice looks like? Or is it just me trying to outrun the memory of a voice that's not coming back? Some nights I still wake up in the dark and can feel the pool water, like a cold hand, reminding me of what I lost and what I did to feel less lost. The ending wasn't cinematic fireworks. It was an awkward acceptance. Marla fixed some things, left others, and eventually sold the house to a quiet couple who planted sunflowers where her hedges had been perfection. I stayed. I kept the pool because, for all its weight, it was mine, a place where I could stand and not be under surveillance, where the night wind sounded like nothing I owed anyone. People still whisper on their porches sometimes. That's life. You don't get to rearrange people's hearts with paperwork, but you can make them answer for the parts they choose to weaponize. So here's the thing I want you to take away. If anything, there's a line between making life right and being someone who profits off another's ruin, and it's easy to cross if you're hurting. I crossed close enough that I can't say there weren't regrets. But I also learned that dignity can be slow and messy. It creeps back in through boring channels, through letters and lawful signatures, and the small interventions of neighbors who choose peace over spectacle. If you think you know what you would do, smash a mailbox, post a video, block a driveway, ask yourself why. Is it to be heard, or to be seen breaking something in someone else? There's a difference. Tell me, did I do the right thing, or did I lean into someone else's downfall because I wanted to feel powerful again? Drop your take below. Be honest, be messy, be kind if you can. Share if you've seen this kind of neighbor war, and tell me what you'd do differently. Justice, revenge, grief, they're heavy words, but that's the point. They deserve more than a hot comment.